Late. We're talking today about Oregon's declining birth rate, the lowest level in 25 years. We're joined today by Karen Foster, author of No Way Baby, as we kind of explore the decision that a lot of women are making either to delay or not have children. And that was our findings, that Oregon hasn't had a birth rate this low in 25 years. A lot of women choosing to do so for a variety of factors. And let's start there, Karen. First of all, your book,
Yes.
No Way Baby. Tell us a little bit about the book itself, and then we'll get into the discussion about why women are choosing to either delay or not have children.
Sure. So the book No Way Baby, Exploring, Understanding, and Defending the Decision Not to Have Children was a book that I wrote when I was finalizing my decision not to have children in my late 30s, and the option to change my mind was starting to go away. And I realized that there was really very little literature out there on the topic. I mean, the bookstores are full of shelves of books about having children, about, raising them. But exploring this option is something that there really wasn't a lot of information about. So I decided to go out and do something about that. And I did a lot of research and really found that there's a lot of valid reasons why people are doing this that are not the reasons that we often hear, like we're selfish or we don't like children or things like that. So I really took all the objections that people like me hear, like who's going to take care of you when you get old, and I answered all those questions in the book.
Great.
Yeah.
As we continue this conversation, we'd love to hear from you as well. If you have any questions or comments, please post them on our Facebook page here. We'll have you join in the conversation. We've got Jared, our producer, who will ask those questions. We'll try and answer them as best we can. So one of the big questions is factors. What are the biggest factors in women deciding not to have children?
I think a lot of it has to do with the expense, and then we have become a society where every individual is valued by their earning potential. Okay? So in the women's movement of the 70s, you didn't have a lot of women out there carrying signs that said, throw a mandatory 50-hour-a-week job on top of everything else I'm already doing, and that's what I'm looking for. That's not what we were looking for. And yet that's what's happened now. And so while my generation, Generation X, struggled a lot to remain middle class once we had children, the next generation watched that and is saying, whoa, wait a second. That's not everything it's cracked up to be. So maybe I need to rethink this and look at some of these factors. So I think that the financial is a big one.
Like student debt is one.
Well, so let's start
Housing.
with that one. I went to public college when it was $500 a semester. Okay, I got out of school, I had no student debt. So that wasn't even one of my reasons.
Right.
But when I talk to young people today who are around, when I say young people, I mean of childbearing years, that is a big factor. I had a woman tell me in her mid-30s the other day that she's got her student debt down to almost $9,000 in her mid-30s. So we have this indentured servitude almost to where people are really trying to pay off these loans, and they look at the cost of raising a child and it just doesn't fit in. There's a tragic element to this, because while I am childless by choice and never wanted to be a mom, some people do want to be a mom and they can't, and that's not good for society. So I think that some of these issues that make us choose not to have children also are bigger issues in our society that we should be talking about if we're going to talk about family values, and be looking at what are some of the problems here? Now, certainly an environmental factor could be one, and I know my fellow tree huggers out there are like, yay, yay, fewer people, that's good. And from an environmental sustainability perspective, it is. But from a tax-based perspective, from a productivity perspective, from a labor force perspective, from all that perspective, it can actually be a difficult thing for a society to deal with. So us having children just to have them, that's not enough anymore. We have to have a reason to have them, and when you have $1 million project, which is raising a child, and you're still paying student loans in your 30s, it just doesn't make good financial sense. So every year, the Department of Agriculture puts out a number. It says this is how much it costs to raise a child. And that number now is somewhere in the 200,000s. And they say $200,000 to raise a child, plus a little bit more than that. But that number only includes keeping a child alive for 18 years. So other demographers have done other research on it, and when you factor back into every individual in our society is valued by their earning potential. So you have to take out the earning potential of the caregiving parent or the child care, either one, add that in. College is a luxury priced necessity, so that extracurricular activities so that they can have a life and be part of, part of their community as kids and all of that, you get to $1 million pretty quick. So that's not real sustainable for even middle-class Americans.
Yeah. Yeah. For those of you just joining us, this is part of a discussion about Oregon's declining birth rate as part of a KGW investigation. We looked at the latest numbers and found that indeed, after fairly steady numbers for a long time, the past 2 years have seen a fairly significant decline in the number of babies born in Oregon. A couple things that stand out here. One is that women are waiting longer. Those who are having children are waiting longer. Also, Hispanic women who back in 1990 averaged about 3 children are now having less than 2 babies. So that specific demographic is changing as well. If you have questions, certainly post them in our comments. We're happy to answer those or try to answer those as well. We talk a lot about the millennials and
yes.
millennials not having children.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Well, think about it. The millennial generation came of age during the Great Recession. So as they were getting out of school with that $40,000 average student debt, they were coming of age in a society where we were having the worst economy since the Great Depression. Okay? Like the worst one that hopefully any of us will encounter in our lifetimes. So you can imagine being raised in the 90s, which was the most prosperous decade in the United States of America, would give you an idea of what your adult life is supposed to be like. That's your only experience. Then you go to school because society promised you that if you went to school and got an education, you'd get a good job and you'd have this American dream. And what happened is they all did that, and they went to school, and they did all that, and then they got out of school. And I can't tell you how many years I was working with young people who were just completely demoralized by the fact that they had all this education and were talented and hardworking and want to show up for work and want to be on time, all those things. Right. Had the maturity and just could not find a job. And meanwhile, the student loans start coming due and all of that. And so, a lot of people would say, "Oh, these young people, they're so spoiled, they won't go down to get a job at this place or that place." And it's like whatever places we're talking about, and say, "Okay, they don't want to go to Walmart and get a job." Okay, the job at Walmart is not going to pay their student loan. Right. So, it's really not as simple as that. These young people are staying at home. In other societies that are very expensive, where people stay with their parents, we have low birth rates too. For example, in Italy, the cost of living is very high, and young people stay at home until their 30s, until they get married, and they have a low birth rate because they're waiting so long to start their families because it takes so long to be able to afford it. So they have about a 1.3 birth rate, which is cutting their population almost in half every generation.
Which is something we should point out that Oregon is not unique. I mean, this really does mirror national numbers in the declining birth rate. Yes. And internationally, we're saying the same thing as well.
Yeah, so actually Europe and Asia have been way ahead of us on the baby bust for a long time. So they've been talking about this issue for a long time, and there's been all kinds of things that have happened in Europe to try to incentivize women to have children. A town in Italy gave women $15,000 to have a baby. They ended up paying a lot of women who were going to have babies anyway. $15,000 wasn't quite enough to do it. In Russia, they had a contest. If your baby was born on their national day, their national celebration day, you got all these prizes. And the 9 months before that national day was a holiday, so everyone could stay home and make babies. So there's all this incentive. And yet it's not enough when you think about the day-to-day, working full-time, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, part-time work not being really an option with any kind of benefits or real good money. And so as the birth rate starts to decline, you see a decline in population, which, again, has two sides to it. It has the environmental positives and the economic negatives. So we have to look at that and plan for it, and Europe's ahead of us on that. Now, what's going to happen in the United States? Are we going to keep our birth rate this low? I don't know. During the Great Recession, which again was our other worst economy since along with the Great Recession, we had a very low birth rate in the United States. It was about 1.3, 1.4. And you can imagine, even without the birth control pill, I mean, people were, no, that's not something that we can afford or do. And then after World War II, we baby boom, right? We have the baby boomers. And the philosophy there is that after World War II, we had defeated fascism, and there was all of this optimism, and the economy was great, and of course everyone's going to have babies. But the thing is that Japan also had a baby boom in the 1950s. And they were defeated, right? They didn't have, I mean, about as defeated as you can get. And so they didn't have that. So why did they have a baby boom at that time? And where I'm going with this is, while this hasn't been researched because it would take so long and so complicated to research, there is some discussion about, is there an inherent wisdom in our humanity? In other words, after World War II, we had massive population loss in both countries. And we had a baby boom. Replace the population. Now we're busting at the seams with population. And one of the things with all these factors, student loan, work, all of this, one of the things I hear most often is, I just have no drive to do this. I have no drive to do it. And it does make me wonder. We are part of this collective, environment, this nature. Do we have an inherent wisdom where the drive to reproduce ourselves goes down as the population goes up, and the drive to reproduce ourselves goes up as the population goes down, as we saw after World War II? So it's interesting.
We're here with Karen Foster, author of No Way Baby, Exploring, Understanding, and Defending the Decision Not to Have Children. This is a follow-up to a KGW investigation looking at the declining birth rate in Oregon. A lot of people growing up kind of had this idea that we should be married, have kids, and buy a house. Kind of the traditional American dream, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
Have the attitudes changed as far as society and the view of women who don't have children?
Yes, in fact, I don't know if you've been looking at this, but the millennial generation also doesn't want to buy houses. And so this is something that we've been seeing reported on as well. And so when you look in the real estate industry, and remember, again, millennial generation came of age while their parents and their friends' parents were going bankrupt and and foreclosed on their house. The bust, that big bust that happened. And they saw people who were educated, talented, skilled, out of work for 3 years and losing their house. And so I do think that that there is something to that, right. that the whole idea of this: grow up, get married, buy a house, have the kids. People are questioning that, the younger generation especially. My generation questioned it some. Baby boomers started with question and everything, right? And then we kind of followed up, and then the millennials came in, and they're looking at it, and they're saying, wait a second, I can't even buy a house. And now if we bring it back to Portland, what we've seen in our Portland area, of course, is that we've gone from being one of the most affordable cities in the United States, a city of our size, to being really an unaffordable city, much like the other West Coast cities of San Francisco and Seattle, in a very short period of time because of our influx of population. And so the idea of buying a house and having a, multi-$1,000 mortgage when wages are stagnant, it's just not very attractive to people. And that's why you see all of this small rental property going up, these studios everywhere, because people who are coming here are not wanting to buy houses, and they're not wanting to be bogged down with stuff. And while children aren't stuff, there is also this shift from kind of putting roots down and getting stuff and keeping up with the Joneses and having the car that the neighbor has and all of that, to, no, I don't want stuff, I want experiences. And so travel and learning and different things like that seem to be of higher priority for the younger generations. Yeah.
We've had one question so far. You kind of touched on it, but maybe you can reiterate the answer. Zoe Elise wanted to know if the Oregon birth rate is on par with national numbers.
And they are, generally speaking. Very similar to what we see nationally is this decline in number of babies being born around the country. you know, you talked to population experts and you talked about the economy, and they really anticipated that with the recession, no surprise, the birth rate goes down. They anticipated there would be a bounce back effect, that we would see numbers return to normal, or at least not continue to see this decline. What are your thoughts? I mean, do you anticipate that we'll continue to see this decline, or will there be some bounce back?
Well, for the millennial generation in particular, there's not going to be a lot of bounce back. You know, I don't think, but maybe in the generations that whoever comes after them, who's already starting to come of age,
Right.
you know, that next generation possibly. But I think that there are other factors. We could remove some of these things, like I said, and in 1968, with the invention of the birth control pill and then the legalization of abortion in the 70s, the option of not having children started to become an option. And over in the 60s and 70s, there was more stigma around it, and in the 80s, still some stigma, and in the 90s, a little bit less, and a little less. But more and more, there's less and less stigma associated with not having children. When I was writing my book, and only when you write a book like this does this happen, or maybe if you're a priest or a counselor in private practice where someone comes and tells you this. I had women come to me, and men, multiple times, and tell me if I had any idea what I was getting myself into, I would not have had children. And no apologies, no qualifiers of, oh, but it's great, and I'm glad I did it.
Right.
You know, just wouldn't have done it.
Yeah,
Okay? And I think about in my own family line where, you know, people may have made different choices if they had lived at a different time. And so now, today, I mean, when you're a woman in the 60s and 70s, getting married and having children is really your best bet to having any kind of sustainable lifestyle, right? But now that's not true. And so part of it is that this just hasn't been an option before. It just hasn't been an option, and now it is. And so one of the many things, you know, we talk about this issue of choice with female reproduction, and the choice whether or not to have children is part of that. So, and it's not talked about enough. It's not talked. There's still an assumption. Oh, when you have kids, you'll understand. Oh, when you, not if you, or you know, all of that. So it's not really talked about that much, but it is much more of an option. I come from a very traditional Catholic family. I got very little blowback on my decision. Very little. I know people from non-religious families who got a lot of blowback, and they're younger than I am. So we're in an in-between stage. But it's a lot less of a stigma. You're not an old maid and a childless old maid, you know, we must pity you anymore if you choose not to have children. So there's other options.
Yeah. One of the interesting findings we had in looking at the numbers is a lot of women are delaying childbirth.
Yes.
So whereas previously women in their early to mid-20s may have had a child, oftentimes they're waiting until their early 30s. As a result, population experts say it's less likely that you'd have multiple children, because if you're waiting until your 30s to have your first child, then you probably just have one. The idea of delaying childbirth, what factors come into play there, and are they different than those who choose not to have children at all?
I think that some of them are the same and some of them are different. There are those who just want to wait until they're more financially secure, and that just takes longer than it ever has. You know, it really takes longer than it ever has, and that's good, right? And that's good. They may be having fewer children than they would have otherwise. So one instead of two, or two instead of three, or something like that. Also, when you delay, you have a higher likelihood of infertility and problems like that. So those become factors. And so yes, you'll see people having children but having fewer. And one thing that's very interesting, and if there's anyone out there that wants to chime in on this, I'd love it. Many of my friends who have one child hear the same things that I hear as a childless by choice person, which is, you're selfish. Who's going to take care of you when you get old? How could you do that to that one kid and not give them any siblings? How could, you know, all of these things. And it's interesting, I think, in a way, no way, baby, we could do maybe one child, you know, like issue too, because a lot of times women who have that experience hear the same things, and what it really comes down to, I think, and I know that men experience this too, but certainly women in our society, whatever choice you make, someone's going to have a problem with it. Someone's going to have a problem with it. And so what we have to do is go inside and make the choice that's right for us. Are we going to regret not having kids? That's, are we going to regret it one day? The research does not show that that happens. Can I find one person that made that choice and then regretted it later? Sure. Okay. But overall, does that happen? No. No, it doesn't. And in fact, the research shows that there's no difference between happiness between people who have kids and don't have kids, or rates of depression, or any of those kinds of things. So, I don't think that we'll see a big bounce back anytime soon. I think that what's probably better for us to do is start thinking about how we will cope long term. It's not in our face like it is in Europe, but long term with declining population. And, you mentioned the Hispanic angle, and I wanted to get back to that for a minute, because when
this being women in 1990 who were Hispanic women averaged 3 children typically. Now it's less than 2.
Yes, yes. So this was something that I researched when I was writing my book, and one of the reasons that the United States has had stable population, meaning that our replacement rate is about 2.1, which means that you have a stable population, right? And the reason, most Anglo-Americans were looking like Europe, 1.2, 1.3 child per woman. But we have so much immigration here that we had a stable population. So that's one thing. Another thing that we don't give credit for our many wonderful immigrants is that they've made our population stable, so we didn't have a declining tax base and a declining, all those things that they have in Europe. Many of the Hispanics in the Portland area are second generation, and what you find is that first generation people who immigrate from south of our border, Mexico and beyond, are accustomed to large families in their culture, because a large family is important to survival, whereas here it can be detrimental. And so the first generation often does still have a lot of children, but the next generation comes right in line with the rest of America, which is, oh no, that's too expensive. And so we have a lot of second generation Hispanic women here, and that's part of the reason, I believe, why we're seeing fewer. They're acclimating to the culture here, and where children are an asset in their home country, they're actually an expense here. And so I think that has a lot to do with it.
Interesting. Karen Foster, author of No Way Baby, with us today. We appreciate you being with us. We'll continue the conversation online. If you'd like to at any point post a comment, feel free. We'll respond as best we can. Again, this is a follow-up to a KGW investigation looking at Oregon's declining birth rate. We appreciate you being with us today. Thanks so much.